This video was brought to you by the TLDR store, where our Germany with Shoes pin badge is finally back in stock. So grab that or any other, we have loads including every EU country, and get 10% off with code GERMANY. The link is down below. When it comes to German elections, it's safe to say that we've done a fair few videos on it. And while a lot of our coverage has been focused on the federal elections and who'll be replacing Angela Merkel as Chancellor, on Sunday, Germans in Berlin went to the polls to vote for more than just the next Chancellor. On Sunday, Berlin also held a referendum, one that could have major consequences for housing in Berlin and beyond. So let's take a look at what happened and why it could be significant right now. Like many cities around the world, Berlin, and the rest of Germany to be honest, is going through somewhat of a property crisis. In London, the average house price has risen by about 2/3 in the decade since the financial crisis. In Manhattan, prices have risen by about 30%. But according to Deutsche Bank, prices are up 123% in Germany's big 7 cities: Berlin, Hamburg, Düsseldorf, Cologne, Munich, Frankfurt and Stuttgart. In Berlin specifically, in the 7 years between 2013 and 2020, house prices, on average, rose by 88.5%. In absolute terms, back in 2013, the average home in Berlin was valued to the tune of €2,526 per square metre. In 2020, that figure stood at €4,634. Buying a house isn't the only or even main issue at hand though. Renting is. A staggering 85% of Berlin residents rent, and given the ever-increasing house prices, renting isn't cheap either, leading to the infamous Berlin rent caps. Back in 2020, Berlin's parliament brought in a law called residential rent price cap. This move saw excessively high rents reduced, and then frozen for 5 years. After that 5-year period elapsed, the cap would then be increased in line with inflation. Well, that was the plan, because earlier this year, Germany's Constitutional Court ruled that Berlin's state government did not have the authority to bring in the rent cap in the way it did. Anyway, back to the referendum, because in April 2019, the Expropriate Deutsche Wohnen Co. initiative was launched. Deutsche Wohnen is a huge property company, and the initiative was pushing for the nationalisation of properties owned by Deutsche Wohnen and other private property firms who held over 3,000 property units in Berlin. To start this process, they had to gather 20,000 signatures, after which the government would be required to conduct an assessment as to the legality of the proposal. Over 70,000 signatures were eventually gathered, so the Berlin government conducted an assessment and assessed that the move was legal. Then, to trigger a referendum on the issue, the campaign had 4 months to collect 175,000 valid, handwritten and fully verified signatures. However, the campaign smashed this goal, collecting 364,000 signatures. And so, the referendum was scheduled for September. To pass, the referendum needed 2 electoral hurdles: a majority of voters voting yes, as well as at least 25% of all eligible voters voting yes. And, well, clear them they did. 56.4% voted in favour in the referendum, with more than 25% of eligible voters supporting the measure. However, the referendum was non-binding. And as such, it's up to the government of Berlin to decide whether or not to take the idea forward or simply ignore it. And the latter is looking more likely. Before the elections and the referendum, the frontrunner in Berlin's mayoral race, the SPD's Franziska Giffey, came out strongly against the idea, saying, "For me, the subject of expropriation is already a red line. I don't want to live in a city that sends the signal, this is where expropriation is taking place." And, well, Giffey was ultimately voted in as Berlin's first female mayor, meaning that without the leadership's backing, it's looking unlikely to come to fruition. If, however, the plans did get turned into policy, it would be far from easy to pass, implement, and subsequently enforce the law. As was the case with Berlin's rent cap, it's highly likely that some of the targeted companies will bring legal challenges against the move, questioning the constitutionality of expropriating property. Though the matter isn't as clear-cut as either side would like. Article 15 of Germany's constitution states, land, natural resources and means of production may, for the purpose of nationalisation, be transferred to public ownership or other forms of public enterprise by a law that determines the nature and extent of compensation, i.e., nationalisation is legal. However, expropriation without compensation doesn't look like it is, and expropriation with inadequate compensation is, well, it's harder to say. This clause of Germany's constitution has, to add to the uncertainty, never actually been triggered before, so this would be entirely uncharted waters. To further complicate matters, Berlin's own state constitution says, expropriation shall only be permissible in the public interest pursuant to the law, which immediately raises the question as to whether the expropriation being pushed by the referendum is in the public interest, because nationalisation isn't even mentioned. A lawyer at one of Berlin's leading real estate firms believes that an expropriation law would not be legal in Berlin. Talking to DW, he highlights how focusing on those with more than 3,000 property units would not be based on an objective basis, as well as the fact that compensating property firms below market value would likely be unconstitutional on its own. The more likely course of action, then, is one of pressure and politics, i.e., the threat of expropriation to force property firms' hands, something that can already be seen. On the 17th of September, Deutsche Wohnen, together with another major property firm in Berlin, who are actually trying to buy out Deutsche Wohnen, announced that they'd be selling 10% of their property in the city for some 2.5 billion euros. In the words of The Economist, something that's meant to be a friendly gesture, but also a thinly veiled attempt to stop being stripped to the keys of their own homes. Similarly, on the day of the referendum, Akelius, a Swedish property firm, announced that it would be selling 28,000 apartments, 14,000 of which were in Berlin. But what do you think about this whole situation? Should the non-binding referendum be turned into action? Would property expropriation fix Berlin's housing market, or lead to a crisis of confidence? Or do you think that something in the middle will become reality instead? As always, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Like I said at the start, you can get 10% off everything in the TLDR store if you use code GERMANY. That includes our book, stickers, magnets, and pins, including over 50 different countries of shoes badges, with that including Germany finally back in stock. We'd really appreciate your support, and the link is in the description. Thanks so much. Also, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. Special thanks to our Patreon backers who make videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name at the end of videos, then you too can back us on Patreon. The link to that is also in the description.